Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome and thank you for attending Schools Forum. So without further ado, we'll get going. Simon, could you just offer up any apologies, please, from members?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we've had apologies from Jessica Roden, Richard Sutton, Sarah Clark, Alison Parr, Kirsty Rogers, Philip Siddle, but he sent substitute Tim Hopkins, and Steve Breeze. Also, I've had apologies from Anne Tapp, but I'm convinced I saw Anne join the meeting. Are you there, Anne?
I am, yes. I've managed to attend.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry, I'm on. Anne, we don't take much confusing, but you've confused us. Before we move on to item number 2, can I just welcome Steve Barnard, who's going to be an observer from the ESFA. So we better all be on our best behaviour. So welcome, Steve. Have we got any declarations of interest, please? No? Fabulous. So we'll move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of January. You know my style by now. I don't read line by line through the minutes. Have we any issues with the minutes or any challenges around any inaccuracies? Steve?
Yeah, are you doing matters arising as well?
Yeah, we'll do matters arising after we've done any concerns with the minutes.
Okay, I'll take my hand down then.
Everybody happy with the minutes? Thank you. So we'll move on to item 4, which is matters arising. There were 2 matters arising. The Primary Behaviour Support Services update, and that was minute 7. Tim, have you got an update on that, please?
Afternoon, everybody. Yes, so I do have an update in terms of this. This was to ask around the exclusions of primary age children. And so what we've done is looked at the exclusions of primary age children over the financial year, so 21-22, sorry. There were 8 pupils who were permanently excluded, and of those 8 pupils, 5 had been referred to the behaviour support services. Out of the 135 youngsters that had been referred in, so that was just under 4% of that population. Of the other 3, one of those 3 had been referred previously, and then the school didn't take up the offer of some additional support. One of the pupils was referred into the service, but then moved out to the county before the support was delivered. And then there was just one youngster that hadn't been referred into the service. So that's the update there.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Have we got any further questions for Tim around that particular item? Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the second item from Matters Arising, which is the Minority Ethnic Achievement Service update, which was on minute 8. And again, Tim, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that this was not particularly around the Ethnic Minority Achievement Service. This was to do with those Afghan refugees and settlement. And we've got an update from that. So none of the families that were housed in the bridging accommodation in Newcastle settled permanently in Newcastle. All the families that were actually at the bridging accommodation were offered a permanent home in Staffordshire. So as a total of 25 permanent homes were made available by district and borough councils and Stoke-on-Trent City Council. 2 of those were offered by Newcastle Borough Council, but they were taken by families who lived elsewhere. And it just says only half of the available homes were accepted by the families, as many wanted to wait for accommodation in larger urban areas. The remaining homes that were offered in Staffordshire and Stoke were taken by Afghan families in accommodation elsewhere in the country. And then when the Home Office advised families that the bridging accommodation or the hotel in Newcastle was to close, those that had not accepted the offer of a permanent home in Staffordshire were then relocated, and none of the families that were relocated have moved back into the Newcastle district.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Have we got any further questions for Tim around that particular area? Okay, thank you. Item 3, which is the minutes, and item 4, last chance for anybody to ask any questions around those two particular items. Steve?
Yes, so just one matter arising from the minutes of the last meeting on page 5, the penultimate paragraph, which was about access to support when dealing with behaviour of challenging children. There's a reference towards the end of that paragraph to a consultation taking place towards the middle of the spring term, this spring term, and I believe that's been delayed. So I wonder if we could just have a bit of background to that, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Again, I'll bring Tim in.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Chair. In terms of that response, Steve, yes, a decision was made due to the district and borough elections that PERDA should apply, and so that in terms of the consultation can't take place during that PERDA period, and PERDA finishes on the 4th of May when the district and borough council elections take place. And the update is that consultation will begin on the 17th of May, and then it will take place right the way through to the 5th of July. And Steve, I did put that in a reply to you to say I think I've had that confirmed now, so those dates have been confirmed.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Moving on to item 5, which is decisions taken by the chairman under delegated powers. For the record, there haven't been any decisions made by myself, which leads us on to the advance notice of the election of chair and vice chair. Simon, could you pick that up, please?
Sure, thank you, Chair. So this is just very quickly, just to let members know that at the next meeting that we have in July, we'll be looking for, well, we won't be looking for a new chair and vice chair, but we'll be going through the election process for a chair and vice chair. So it's just advanced warning if anybody has any interest in that role, to have a think about that over the next few months. If you'd like to put yourself forward, you will need to have somebody second you, or propose you, sorry. If you'd like to have a conversation with me, then you can do that, or Tim. If you prefer to have a chat with Tim, then you can contact us just to have a chat through it. I'm sure many of you have been through the process before where at the next meeting, which will be face-to-face, the people who'd like to put themselves forward and the proposers will do so, and then there'll be a vote of the forum members, and obviously the person with the most votes is voted in as chair for the next few years. So it's just advance warning of that process.
Tim?
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. And just to say, I think in our constitution, it does make a reference to the indication of the current chair and vice chair in terms of their intentions, if they're willing to kind of declare that now, as to whether they're willing to stand again, so that colleagues again are aware of the position of the current incumbents in those roles. So I don't know, again, I'm kind of looking at Richard and Steve as chair and vice chair, whether they wanted to kind of declare their position at this point, so that forum colleagues are aware of that.
Yeah, I'll declare my position. I'm prepared to put my cap in the ring. Steve?
Yeah, well, I repeat what I've said many times before, particularly when I was chair, that I was more than happy to stand down. I'm very happy to continue, but in terms of succession planning, and people like me having been around a long time, if someone else was proposed or put themselves forward, I wouldn't contest it, but I am, rather than see it vacant, I am happy to continue.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Leading nicely on is item 7, which is the May election, Simon.
Okay, thank you. So again, this is advance warning for the members that this affects. As you'll be aware, when you're elected onto the forum, it's for a 4-year period. After that 4-year period is up, we go through an election process, which as incumbent members, you're entitled to put yourself forward again. But I just wanted to let those people on my list in front of me know that their positions are coming to an end in May, and the election process will be taking place at the similar sort of time. So they are Vicky Lewis with the Maintain Primary, Anne Tapp, Primary Academy, Abigail Rourke, Primary Academy. Moving down, we've got Alison Parr, All Academy Special Schools, and Richard Redgate with All Alternative Provision Academies. Also, Chris Wright, you're the Middle Schools Forum representative. I understand that's not going to be an election, so the request here would be to ask the Middle Schools Forum if they're happy for you to remain on the forum, if indeed you are happy to remain on the forum yourself. Also, Judy Wyman with the schools consultative groups. Again, the same process for you. If you're happy to stand, just to ask that group if they're happy for you to remain on the forum as their representative. Alternatively, if you've had enough and you want to stand down, whether they'd like to put somebody else forward as a representative. We've also got Sarah Clark. Now, it's very different with Sarah. Sarah informed us yesterday that she's going to be leaving the forum as she's moving out of the area through work. So that position, which is all secondary academies, will also be going up for election at the same time during May. I'll send each of you emails so you have that information that recorded directly to you. But the process is due to start. The new process will start from Monday onwards, and then Trust will start the process where they'll be sending emails out to various governors and heads of schools to start to look for new representatives. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Are there any questions from the floor while we've got Simon here around membership or elections? No, thank you. Can I just take this opportunity to thank Sarah Clark for her contribution to Schools Forum. I know Sarah isn't with us today, but if we could have that minuted, that would be helpful. So thank you to Sarah. Leading on to item 8, which is notices of concern and licence deficit agreements. Mel, can you pick this up, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the first paper from interest today is notices of concern. It's a standing paper. This one just details that in the period since the last forum, there have been no new notices of concern either issued or withdrawn.
Thank you, Mel. That was short and sweet.
Short and sweet.
No problem.
I was waiting for a barrage of questions.
As it should be.
Second paper from interest. Do you want me to carry on with that, Richard?
Yes, please.
So the second paper was just an update to the financial regulations. We need to report on any changes to the SFS finance regs and forum. This was just a simple change in the insurance detail, just details now that Maintain Schools now buy into the RPA, so DFE's risk protection agreement. So the details in the appendix, the existing text, and then what's in the guidance now.
Okay, thank you, Mel. Just to make sure that was item 8 and item 9.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So that moves us on to item 10, which is the school's budget update. Will?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was on mute. This is the annual report for school budget report for 23-24. Most of the decisions have already been made, and all the decisions have already been made and communicated to schools via the VSLN, so all the budget statements and the TRAs are there, and all the early year providers will be getting their budget notifications by the end of the month if they haven't received them already. But this is just a high-level report to confirm what the decisions were. So the executive summary says that for schools, there was a request to transfer 0.5% of schools block DSG to high needs, which was rejected by the Secretary of State. So that funding remained in the school block. The growth fund budget has been set at 2.7 million, and any underspend will be transferred to the DSG reserve as per the deficit recovery plan. The final education functions levy for the general duties for maintained schools has been set at £54 per pupil, which is a slight reduction to that communicated in November's forum. The budgets, again, have been set using the national funding formula. And in terms of protections, as the 0.5% from MFG has been set at 0.5%, and ensuring overall affordability for gains have been capped at 2.64%. For early years, the base rates have been set at £4.52 and for 3 and 4 year olds, and £5.67 for 2 year olds. That's the 100% of the increase that we've received in going into those base rates. The early years contingency has been set at 0.7% of a 3 and 4 year olds, of the early years block rather. And any underspend on the contingency will be returned to providers as a one-off payment in the following financial year, subject to affordability. High needs, the funding has increased by 12 million from 22-23 to 23-24, and the MSG has been set at 0.5% with no capping of gains. A further significant overspend is anticipated on the high needs block. So just stepping through the report briefly, the central provisions, the dedelegation of the central school services block are basically as confirmed in November 22-23. So we'll retain the central block to fund for historical commitments and all the ongoing functions mentioned in that report, and no change to the delegation other than the risk protection arrangement. The RPA has been confirmed at £23 per pupil. The growth fund, the allocation was 4.1 million. With this funding has been used to fund growth above the census and the NFF, which is 1.4 million, meaning 2.7 million is left to meet commitments under the infant class size and exceptional growth fund policies, and any underspend will be transferred to a DSG reserve in line with the deficit recovery plan. And again, for the education functions, for the general duties has been set at £54, which is a slight reduction in that forecast at the November meeting of £56.47. Stepping through to the school budgets, the factors within the NFF for deprivation have increased by 4.3%. All other factors have increased by 2.4%. And the supplementary grant for 23-24 has now been rolled into the NFF, into the various factors. The 0.5%, as already talked about, has been rejected from the Secretary of State, so that remains in the schools block. This has meant that overall affordability, the MSG has been it's been set at 0.5%, but the gains have had to be capped at 2.64%. The major announcements we've had in the last few months was in the autumn statement, with a separate mainstream schools additional grant being, which is going to be on top of this funding at the rates published in paragraph 15 of the report, which for Staffordshire is estimated to be as a whole about 21 million, which is just over 3% of the allocation. But that is going to be confirmed to us in spring this year, and we expect to be making payments out in April. But the academies will receive the funding directly from the ESFA. Moving on to early years, the paragraph 19 says for rates coming into Staffordshire for 3 and 4 year olds is £4.87, and for 2 year olds is £5.77, which is an increase of 26p and 20p respectively. This has all gone into the base rate. The Disability Access Fund has increased by £28 to £828 per eligible child per hour, and the early years pupil premium has increased by 2p from 60p to 60p pence per eligible child per hour. With the decision made on the central expenditure in forum, in November's forum, this has meant that 96% of our 3 and 4 year old funding can be passed out to providers, which is above the minimum limit of 95%. In order to set the rates, we had another workshop, an annual workshop with the early years reference group with the sector to talk through the pressures they're facing and how they would like the rates to be set. The main issues raised were they wanted to see as much to go through the base rate as possible, and they wanted a continuation of the deprivation funding, and they recognised the need for the contingency. Although with the deprivation funding, there were mixed views on how this should be paid out, and they want to explore the possibility of using different a calculation for setting this, which is more child focused. So in summary, the increase that we had from the government for 3 and 4 year olds and 2 year olds has all gone into the base rate. To increase the base rate to £4.52 for 3 and 4 year olds and £5.67 for 2 year olds. The deprivation rates have remained the same as 20p for the lower rate and 30p for the higher rate, which we're estimated to be 1.6% of the overall 3 and 4 year old budget. The contingency fund has been set up to manage fluctuations in demands over the year, and 0.4% of, and it represents 0.4% of the 3 and 4 year old funding and 1.7% of the 2 year old funding, which is equivalent to 0.7% of the whole early years DSG block, which is lower than the 1% threshold advised by the workshop. For the high needs
Will,
funding,
sorry to interrupt, Will,
yeah.
just to give you a bit of a breather and to catch your breath, can we just give members the opportunity to have any questions around the schools block and the early years before we move on to the high needs? So first of all, have we got any questions around the schools block from members of forum, please? Vicky?
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to raise a concern really around school budgets, and just I'm sure everybody's aware of the things that I've just wanted to mention, but just really to understand if there's anything happening centrally around these aspects, really. Just talking to other heads, you know, impact of free school meals, universal free school meals, and the underfunding there, energy costs, the NJC pay awards, which I don't think any of us disagree with, but obviously we've had to find that money from our own budgets, and just from the SEND point of view as well, which I know will link in with the high needs funding, but I just felt that people that we represent would just want that to be raised really, and just trying to understand whether there is anything happening centrally around any of those things really.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. So first of all, I'm going to come to you, Will, and then that might be supplemented by Tim. So Will, could you?
Yeah, so the only thing I'm aware of is the Tim might know more on this, but the additional grant that we've got is to do with the rising costs. So the additional linked to the cost of living crisis. So the mainstream additional grant is to recognise some of those pressures. If there's anything outside of that, I'm not aware of it.
Okay, Tim, could you elaborate, please?
I can certainly add in terms of the lobbying positions. So again, we continue to be part of the F40 group, which is around the fairer funding. So again, Staffordshire still supports the progress there. And what I would say is the elected members continue to lobby central government on behalf of education in Staffordshire. So again, all of the points that you make, Vicky, around the challenges that are faced by both our education providers and also the local authority in terms of High Needs Block are continually raised with members of Parliament and ministers where possible.
Okay, Vicky, are you happy with that explanation?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether there's an understanding really of the impact that we've got at the moment around the free school meals and universal free school meals conversation, and certainly energy. I don't know whether Steve's hands up linked to anything that's to do with that, but I just cannot see how an 160% increase in energy costs in 2 years is affordable for anybody. And the debacle around free school meals, I honestly don't know where that's going to end, because that's a significant pressure, and I think it sits outside some of the things that you've both referred to in terms of SEND, and there's nothing there around the NJC pay awards side of things. Are there any other groups that heads can talk to around those aspects at all, or?
Tim?
I know that we did share some information, Vicky, and Steve, I'm not quite sure, you may have further information around this, is that I'm not quite sure whether it's called Worth Less now or Worth More. And again, there was that work that was taking off, and I'm not quite sure where that is in terms of, again, another kind of national lobby group to make those points. Exactly, again, the points that you're making back into central government. I do know, again, that we do have Steve Barnard on the call from the ESFA, and again, I'm hoping Steve is also kind of making these notes and feeding that back into colleagues within the ESFA as well.
Vicky, I know this doesn't relate specifically to the schools block and it's more to do with the high needs block, but I know that as a trust, we've through our MP, we have written to the Secretary of State expressing some of the concerns over funding. And to be fair, we did get an answer, and quite a thorough answer. You can imagine what the answer was.
Yeah.
I think if you could put those thoughts down, maybe I could have a chat with you as well, and we could maybe pen some kind of letter.
I do just feel like there's quite a number of schools who ordinarily are getting there or thereabouts, usually, whereas this year it just seems that, even with using all your reserves, we're just nowhere near. And I think it's multifaceted rather than being, in one area or another. So it's not as easy to try and think about, how we could find some solutions there. So, yeah, happy to do that.
Okay, so if I hook up with you then, Vicky, and then we can use the structure of the letter that we wrote, and we'll do something very similar.
Thank you.
Just a question then, is that on behalf of Schools Forum then, in terms of that response? It could go as a chair on behalf of Schools Forum.
Yeah, I think that would be the best route. We did it on behalf, if everybody's happy with that, of course. Is there anybody who feels that is not an appropriate reaction? If people feel that's appropriate, then I'm perfectly prepared to sit with you and try and pull through those facts. Yeah. Okay, so I'll link in with you, Vicky, and we'll pen something together and then move that forward.
Thank you,
Steve.
Yes, thank you, Richard. I put my hand up for something else for Will. So if when we finish with this little tangent, if you could come back to me. But I was just picking up as Tim mentioned, Worth More and the points that Vicky's made. Certainly, I can only speak directly on behalf of ASCL, but certainly ASCL are beating this drum constantly, and I know that the other NAHT and the teachers' unions are doing the same thing. So, I mean, that's another route to put pressure on, if you like. Yeah, I put something in the school bag a couple of months ago about what was worth less, whenever it was, several years ago, as a national pressure group to try and improve the overall funding for education, which is being reformed and rebranded as worth more. But I mean, they've decided that their main thrust has really got to be political with a small p, and building up to the next general election, not the local elections coming up. But I will certainly get back to them and see, because we haven't really had very much since the new year. I'll get back to them and see whether there's any progress on that. And if there is, I can certainly circulate it again, either through another paper in the school bag or through other means. But yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if anyone else wants to contribute to this, but so when you finish this strand, if you can come back to me, Richard, on my other point.
Okay, Stephen, no problem. Carolyn, you did have your hand up and it went down. Have we answered anything that you were going to ask?
Yeah, that's a real feedback. Sorry. I was on the same line as Victoria, so all my questions have been answered. Thank you. Okay. And the letter coming from you is exactly what I wanted. So I put my hand down.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Steve, do you want me to come back to you now, or?
Yeah, that's fine. It's a very specific point for Will, and I apologise for springing it on you, because I could have sourced it myself if I'd made the time. I guess you've probably got the figure in your head, but if you haven't, I apologise again. The cap, the national funding formula cap on gains at 2.64%. What do you know offhand what it is in the current year?
The 22-23.
Yeah.
For 22-23, I don't think we capped for gains, Steve. I'd have to check that, but I'm pretty sure we didn't cap for games in 22-23.
Yeah, I got a feeling that was the case, but I didn't check it.
Yeah, we haven't been in a position of having to cap for games for a few years now. This is I feel like we haven't capped for games for maybe 3 years. But again, I'd have to go back to work it out. But yeah, I'm confident we didn't cap for gains in 22-23.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any more questions around the schools block for Will before we move on to the early years? No? Okay, have we any questions for Will on the early years funding, please? Okay, Will, if you could move on to the high needs block.
Yes, certainly. So high needs funding, the government had indicated a high needs block allocation of 122 million in the autumn. However, the recent autumn statements confirmed additional funding for schools of 2 billion nationally, including 400 million, which will be directed to the high needs block, of which Staffordshire would receive 4.8 million in 23-24, of which is according to terms and conditions that have been confirmed alongside the extra funding must be used to provide additional support to special schools and PRUs, equivalent to 3.4% of the estimated total grant funding for each school. So with that extra funding, that takes the actual high needs block allocation for Staffordshire to 127 million for 23-24, which is an increase of 12 million or 10%, which is welcomed, but it is insufficient to close the existing funding gap. and Staffordshire will continue to lobby for both additional funding and a fair and equitable mechanism for addressing cumulative deficits. It is Staffordshire's intention to pass on the full budget increase next year for provision of SEND support. None of this funding will be used to repay historical deficits. The council recognises the financial pressures schools across Staffordshire are facing, and given the increase in government funding, will increase funding to providers by as much as is affordable. The deficits are likely to be in the region of 14 million at the end of this financial year. For 23-24, special school budgets will be set based on a minimum funding guarantee of 0.5%, ensuring that funding for all special schools on a like-for-like basis will increase next year by a minimum of 0.5%. That is in line with government guidance for a MFG of 3% over 2 years, and there'll be no capping of gains. From April, skipping down to paragraph 36, from April 2022, the council introduced a new education banding tool to help calculate top-up funding in a fair and consistent way. And this has now been in place for a year, and a review of the implementation will be undertaken during the forthcoming year to ensure it is delivering the intended objectives. And that's it.
Thank you, Will. Before I throw it out to the floor in terms of questions, I think it probably would be prudent if we allowed Anthony to do his report, and then we can ask any questions around that high needs block. So, moving on to the next item, which is item 11. Anthony.
Afternoon, all. Okay, so yes, the high needs block update. 22-23, as previously, this is a regular report outlining the latest position on the high needs block. To summarise, the paper outlines the forecast overspend in the high needs block this year is now 8.2 million. It's slightly higher than we said at Q3. I think we said 7.8 at Q3, but yeah, it's about 400 grand worse than we were saying at that point. As previous, demand continues to exceed our capacity. With now nearly 7,000 EHCPs within Staffordshire, and going up at generally about 400 per annum. Demand's up 33% from what it was just 3 years ago. Is the key driver of where we currently are. It's impacted across all areas, but especially in the independent sector, with numbers now around 600 and double where they were just 3 years ago. And by some way, the largest budget press in the high needs block, given the cost in that space. Importantly, the paper also outlines the significant decline in the DSG reserves, which at the start of the year were already in deficit by 8.6 million. And as Will just mentioned, they'll increase to around 14 million in deficit by the end of the current year, based on the current overspend in the high needs block. In November, we brought forward a proposed deficit management plan to Schools Forum to mitigate as far as possible the existing overspend over the next 4 years to 26-27. We know this isn't a tap you can switch on and switch off, and it will take time to address the current overspend. Part of the plan includes the 0.5% funding switch from schools block in 23-24 to help fund our transformation plans. That wasn't supported by Schools Forum, and nor was it subsequently supported by the Secretary of State, and therefore there'll be no funding switch next year, and the deficit management plan will need to be updated accordingly. The paper goes on to outline the high needs budget for 23-24, and as Will's already alluded to, the funding next year for Staffordshire will be around 127 million. That's 12 million higher than in 22-23. We do recognise the financial pressures that schools across Staffordshire are facing, and given the current overspend, there's a limit how much of the rise we can actually afford. However, we have obviously made sure we meet the objectives of the MFG criteria set by the government. So next year we'll be setting the MFG at 0.5%. That's equivalent to 3 years, taking into account the increase in 22-23 of 2.5%. So that's 3% over 2 years, and is in line with the government set MFG. Pleasingly, as we'll just mention, including the budget higher than it would have been, because in the autumn statement they announced an extra 400 million for high needs block. That's been passported into the high needs block now in the funding, but there is an extra criteria on that we also need to passport some of that money to special schools, equivalent to 3.4% of the existing grant funding that I made as an additional payment in the new year once we've completed the current year and worked out what that amount needs to be. The report also gives a brief update on other key issues likely to impact on the high needs block in the next year. And firstly, the education banding tool that has now been in place for a year, and as planned, a review will now be undertaken on the implementation and to ensure it's delivering the intended objectives. One of the key objectives was that overall this should be broadly cost neutral, you'll recall, to providers overall and the high needs block itself, given the overspend. Whilst the number of children on the EBT is still relatively low, so far we've seen a bit of a concerning increase in the average top-up cost for EBT placements, which are now over 11,000 compared with the matrix model which is just over 7,000. As I say, there's relatively few numbers at this stage, but that's a concerning shift in the typical top-up cost in the system. It would be unaffordable if that continues as more children transition onto the new system, as it seems to represent a significant shift in the profile of assessments towards higher levels than was expected and modelled in the initial implementation and on which the proposed EBT rates were set. This will be picked up obviously as part of the EBT review that's scheduled to commence at the beginning of the summer term. Secondly, the report goes on to update on the additional risk arising from the latest update in the operational guidance relating to recoupment of the HCP costs for children in the care of other local authorities. We consider the government clarification is all thought through, and given the unfair and disproportionate impact this could have on authorities across the sector, the Council is currently working with other West Midlands authorities to try and continue with the current custom and practice and processes that have been in place for several years, and also lobbying the government to either amend the operational guidance or to amend the National High Needs Block funding formula to address the increasing costs that Staffordshire are likely to incur. Further updates will be brought forward as those conversations progress to mitigate the very significant financial risk, which we estimate could be as much as £7 million per annum for Staffordshire. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Anthony, for that rosy view that you continue to have to deliver at every schools forum.
Pleasure.
I think we've got a number of questions, so the skill for me is to spot whose hand is up. So first of all, we'll go to Steve Barr.
Thank you, Richard. Yeah, it's around the EBT, which I was going to raise, and I'm glad you highlighted it, Anthony. So thank you for that. But firstly, it's a request. It's probably not actually for Anthony, but whether Tim or anyone else is able to give us any more information at this stage about what sort of form that review would take, and leading on from that, whether members of Schools Forum might be invited to contribute to it, and whether, having had presentations in the past when the EBT was in the planning stage, whether we might request, and perhaps we could go on a work programme, a presentation after the review's been concluded as to what the findings were.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I'm going to cross over to Tim to see if he can throw some light.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Ant, I'm sure you're okay for me to pick this question up.
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So in terms of the resource to undertake the review, Steve, that we've secured that, and I think we're pleased in the sense that, as everybody knows, it was Leslie Calverley, who was one of the commissioning managers for SEND, who implemented the EBT last year, and then subsequently took voluntary redundancy from the local authority. That I've been in negotiations with Leslie around securing her time and capacity to start that review process. Now, we have a meeting taking place very early on in April, or the 11th of April actually, where we'll start to scope out that review. My initial conversations with her has been very much along the lines of the way in which we implemented it, as in we will set up a group, and so therefore we will have a working group that will look at it, and we've got no issues absolutely of kind of bringing an update to Schools Forum in July.
Thank you.
Okay, Steve, are you happy with that?
Yep, thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Have we any other hands up?
Any other hands?
Have we got any other questions before I fire a few questions? Okay, are you sitting comfortably, Anthony?
More than?
No, mine aren't too bad, Anthony, don't worry. Can you explain to me the supplementary grants in terms of the special schools? I presume it's the 5/12, isn't it? Because it doesn't kick in till April. That at this moment in time hasn't been rolled into the budgets, has it? It sits on a separate line.
Actually, in this area, the supplementary has been rolled into the high needs block. So that extra 400 million increased in the revised high needs block for Staffordshire, which was 127 million. We got 4 or 5 million of that 400 million in our budget. So when they originally indicated 122, come the actual final settlement into 227. So in this high needs block, it has been rolled in. However, there's conditions with that increase. They're saying that as part of that extra money we've thrown your way, Staffordshire, you are going to have to make a payment to all special schools on top of the MFG, equivalent to 3.4% of their 22-23 funding levels. He sets a criteria of how it's calculated.
Yeah, thanks for that, Anthony, but that wasn't the question. It's
I
okay.
thought that was the question, sorry.
The question.
It sounded very
it was all right. I didn't want you were on a flow. I didn't want to interrupt you. It was a cracking answer, but it wasn't the answer that I wanted. What I'm saying is, as I understand it at the moment, that 3.4% that you quite rightly have said is going to be passed on to the special schools will actually sit on a separate line in the budget.
Yes, it's not being rolled as the rate, it's as a separate payment, mate.
Yeah. So do you anticipate, well, you won't know, will you? But does your gut feeling suggest that will be rolled in
I think they've been rolled to the high needs block. The government may well... Do you remember they did this thing with they gave some money last year and not all authorities passed it on? We did because we put 2.5% on, but and that's why they did the 3% over 2 years effective to force those authorities that hadn't to pass it on. I suspect next year, to make sure a degree of that money has been passed on, they'll set a higher MFG again next year to ensure it's being passed on into the rates.
Okay.
But I can't promise that yet, because I need to see what the government do.
No, I get that, yeah. So one of the other questions was, as the Academy's Peru rep, as well as being the chair of Schools Forum, is that what my CFO is telling me that the supplementary grant that's going to be passed on to the Perus will be at detriment because it's going to be based on the numbers back in 2021, quite clearly because of COVID, the numbers were reduced. Am I right?
I thought it was based on the 22-23 grant level under the guidance. I'll have to check, but it's a prescribed calculation in the calculation by the government. How you have to work it out.
Could you perhaps have a check and just pop us an email? That'd be really appreciated.
Yeah, but it's a prescribed calculation. So we'll have to follow what the government have advised, regardless.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. And then the final one really is for Tim. In terms of the special provision strategy, you spoke earlier around having to delay any consultation. Have we any idea when we were going to get any traction with this in terms of actual implementation? I know that's a difficult question, Tim, but when will we start to see any effects in terms of that deficit management, do you think?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah. So the intention is that we consult during the summer term, and then with the outcome towards the end of the summer term, starting for implementation from January 24. So that's when we expect to start to see on the ground increased provision or that enhanced provision from January 24.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So unfortunately, Anthony, your information you're going to be providing us for a while is still going to be doom and gloom, but hopefully in the slightly distant future things might begin to change.
Can I just come in on that as well in terms of kind of the both the kind of our deficit management plan, but also the other documents that we're providing is, to some extent, even though we will start to implement from January 24, there is still that expectation that within 24-25 that we may still see some, it's plateauing rather than necessarily decreasing, and we expect to see that decrease starting from around 25.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Anthony, have you anything else to add?
Actually, a colleague of mine who's on the line is Helen Bradley's just informed that actually the government have quoted the calculation for PRUs. Helen, do you want to speak up and just mention that?
Yes, the ESFA have actually, for the PRUs, published the amount that they're expecting us to pass on. It's only the special schools where we've got to calculate the average top up according to the grant rules. So if you visit the ESFA website, they've already published what we are expecting to hand over to the PRUs. And it does say on the how they've calculated that. So it's only the special schools that we need to do a calculation of the average top-up spend. For the PRUs, the ESFA have published those additional payments on their website for PRUs. I think Entrust have had those rates, I do believe.
Okay, we'll get that forwarded to you.
Thanks, Anthony.
Richard?
Thank you.
Okay.
Much appreciated. Okay, have we got any more questions for Anthony before we move on to the works programme? Okay, thank you very much, Anthony.
No worries all. Thank you.
Item 12, the works programme and the date of the next meeting. Steve, I think you had a question around the works programme. Am I right?
Yes, thank you, Richard. It's something I talked to Tim about last week, I think, and it was around the budget announcement and nursery funding and wraparound childcare. And as ever, the devil will be in the detail, and the detail has yet to emerge, which is why Tim quite rightly pointed out that apart from the fact the agenda for this meeting had already been published, there wasn't really anything that could be reported at this stage. But we agreed, I think, that it'd be worth putting on the agenda for the next meeting, by which time, hopefully, there will be some flesh on the bones and there'll be a meaningful report that could be presented. So that is my request, because I think it has to be approved by Schools Forum, that goes on the agenda for the July meeting, please.
Okay, Tim?
Yeah, you're right, Steve. I think, as I've probably shared in a number of forums now, that there is some webinars taking place next week, and from memory, or was it this week actually? Maybe it was the 20th and 24th. I can't remember, but there were some webinars that colleagues from our wellbeing and partnerships team would be attending that were specifically picking up on the nursery funding and that wraparound care. I did email our colleagues within the region, so the regions group, as to whether they got any further updates in preparation for this meeting. I've had a response from them to say that they've got no further information yet. And so, again, I would support your request that we do have an update on the works programme for the summer term, even if, in the worst case scenario, it's still that actually we don't have any of that detail.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Steve, are you happy with that?
Yes, thank you. I see Caroline's got her hand up, though.
Okay, sorry, Carolyn, I missed you there. My apologies.
Hi, it was just to come in on the back of that. I attended one of these webinars yesterday, and it was pretty clear the DfE don't have that detail at the moment themselves. So are working on it over the next few weeks, months. So we're still awaiting to hear any further detail on what that actually means, and what that means particularly for Staffordshire as well.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Okay. Any other comments around the works programme? Which leads us on to the dates and the time of the next meeting, which is on Thursday, the 13th of July, which will be face-to-face, held here in the county buildings. So everybody's going to have to comb their hair for that particular day. And I'd just like to finish, as I started, by thanking everybody for their time today for attending Schools Forum. And I will see you in the summer. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.